Good evening, everybody. Welcome to the July 25th, 2023 regular session of City Council. Mayor Peck is out testifying in front of RTD in our best interests. So I'll be starting the meeting and maybe running it to its conclusion. So thank you all for attending. My name is Mayor Pro Tem Aaron Rodriguez. All right, I would now like to call the July 25th, 2023 Longmont City Council regular session to order. The live stream of this meeting can be viewed at the city's YouTube channel or longmontpublicmedia.org/watch or on Comcast channels 8 or 880. Could I get a roll call, please?
Absolutely. Mayor Peck, as you noted, is absent. Councilmember Hidalgo Faring?
Here.
Councilmember Martin?
Here.
Councilmember McCoy?
Present.
Mayor Pro Tem Rodriguez?
Here.
Councilmember Waters? Here. Councilmember Yarborough?
Here.
Mayor Pro Tem, you have a quorum.
We will now stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right, just as a reminder to the public, anyone wishing to speak at first call public invited to be heard will need to add his or her name to the list outside the council chambers. We have closed that as the meeting has started. Only those on the list will be invited to speak at the first public invited to be heard. Speakers who do not place their names on the list will have the opportunity to speak during final call public invited to be heard at the end of the meeting. Anyone wishing to speak on second reading or public hearing items are asked to add their name to the speaker list for each particular item. We do have a list for that as well, which I have received. Each speaker is limited to 3 minutes. Please give your name and address. Moving on to the next item in the agenda is the approval of minutes, but as the minutes were not added in time to the packet, we will be delaying that to the next meeting. Now we are on to agenda revisions and submission of documents and motions to direct the city manager to add agenda items to future agendas. Do I hear any agenda revisions from staff?
I don't have any agenda revisions other than the minutes.
Then the minutes, all right, thank you. Any motions from council? All right, seeing none, we will move on to the city manager's report.
Mayor, Council, I do have a report tonight. If you remember when we allocated the funds for our ARPA projects, specifically the dollars associated with housing, we indicated, and this was a couple of years ago, I believe, we indicated if there were changes that we were going to need, that I would bring that back to you all in this report. One of the things that we're seeing is, if you remember, we allocated $1.6 million to set aside for an affordable assisted living component. And I think when we started this, we obviously didn't understand the complexity of that project and how it relates to Medicare and other issues. At the same time, you all know that we've been looking at working on a for sale affordable and attainable housing project. And as we're working through that project actually is more, it's ripe. And so we are looking to move, wanted to talk to you all about moving that 1.6 million into that affordable, attainable home ownership project, because the gap's also becoming greater because of horizontal construction cost. And that would allow us to fully capture the land associated with that project, and then also create 200,000 that we could put back into the Recovery Cafe project that we're talking about, that's associated with the suites and Zinnia in that location. So wanted to know if council's okay with that. If it is, we'll bring a formal item, but we didn't want to necessarily start down that road without getting a touch point with you all.
Thank you, Harold. Is there any specific comments on this? No? I assume just general direction would be fine, not a formal motion?
Yeah, general direction, because obviously there's formal actions that occur with that, but
sure.
I just didn't want to outrun council on this issue because it was something that we talked about. It doesn't mean that we're not going to work on the attainable or affordable assisted living. It's just the horizon's longer, and now we're starting to be careful with recapture based on time requirements that are associated with the ARPA dollars.
All right, thank you. Councilmember Martin?
I was about to say that very thing, that I think we should put the money where it will yield the most housing units the soonest, and we don't have to abandon the other project, we just have to go ahead with the one we've got in hand.
And if I can add, one of the things that we have seen is through federal budget adjustments, there have been a lot of conversation about utilizing unspent ARPA funds and balancing budgets and other things. And so that's something that we're really in tune with. And this is a good opportunity that can really help us move the other project forward.
All right, very good. Can we just go with a simple thumbs up, thumbs down?
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Next up, we don't have any special reports and presentations this evening, so we'll move on to first call, public invited to be heard. Please remember to provide your address, and you have 3 minutes. First up tonight is Kim Zimmer.
Hi there, I'm Kim Zimmer. I live in Longmont, and you have my address there. I'm just here to talk about the bill, the HR 3557, the American Broadband Act of 2023, which you probably already know about. But the United States Conference of Mayors is opposing this HR 3557 bill, and I just wanted to read their resolution. So whereas HR 3557, American Broadband Act of 2023, was introduced with little notice and without full text on May 22nd, 23, and was approved by the House Committee on Energy and Commerce in order to be reported following markup only 2 days later on May 24th. The bill's introduction, only a single hearing was held on the eventual contents on April 19th before the House Communications Subcommittee, the testimony before which consisted exclusively of that from witnesses supportive of federal preemption, into which not a single state or local government representative was invited to testify. The bill would preempt local governments' rights of way, compensation and management authority, zoning powers, capable franchising authority, and property rights. The bill would bestow upon broadband providers an unprecedented federal grant of access to state and local public property, but impose no obligations on those providers to serve unserved and underserved Americans. It would mandate that sitting decisions be deemed granted, if not denied, by a local government within 60 days, which is as little as 25% as the time that the federal government gives itself. It would make virtually any government decision not to allow the installation of a proposed wireless facility at a provider's request a prohibition preempted by federal law, and would require local governments to draft and publicly release a written explanation for the decision to deny an application on the same day it votes on the decision, which is basically impossible. The bill would substitute the FCC for the local federal district court as the reviewing body for challenges to local government decisions regarding wireless facility applications, thus breaking the promise made by Congress in 1996 that local governments would not be required to travel to Washington to defend local decisions. It would also eliminate cable franchise renewals, thereby restricting the ability of state and local franchising authorities to enforce franchise obligations such as public education and government channel capacities and facilities, government service requirements, and system build-out requirements. It would affirmatively grant cable operators the right to use local rights of way to provide non-cable services while prohibiting localities from imposing any fees on non-cable services for use of those rights of way. And so therefore, be it resolved that the United States Conference of Mayors opposes H.R. 3557 and urges the House and Senate not to pass this legislation. So we ask you, Council, for your support on the opposition resolution to support that. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next, we have Lauren Rombach.
My name is Lauren Rombach. I live at 11687 West Coal Mine Drive. So I am here to ask for an ordinance to ban the sale of puppies and kittens in pet stores in Longmont. The public unknowingly funds puppy mills through their purchases. According to Bailing Out Benji, the definition of a puppy mill is a dog breeding operation in which the health of the dogs is disregarded in order to maintain a low overhead and maximize profits. And according to Merriam-Webster Dictionary, the term puppy mill was first used in 1973 and is a commercial farming operation in which purebred dogs are raised in large numbers. And we have pictures from an aerial photographer over there, so you can see what those large-scale operations look like. And he also has a map of Colorado. There are at least 45 puppy mills within the state of Colorado, and that information was also collected by Bailing Out Benji. In 2022, nearly 5,000 puppies were imported into local pet stores in Colorado. Shelters and rescues are in crisis right now and have had to stop intake. There are at least 1 million dogs euthanized in the United States each year due to lack of space, while puppy mills are churning out thousands and thousands of puppies. Imagine if your life came down to a lack of space. The 2021 Pet Store Consumer Protection Act was passed, and it requires puppy selling stores in Colorado to be more transparent with their customers by posting information about the breeders they use both in-store and online. Unfortunately, we know that several of the stores are not following the spirit of the law and are finding ways to get around disclosing who they buy from. The current law does not prohibit ordinances from being passed. 12 towns in Colorado have already passed them, and sourcing information for pet stores in Colorado can be obtained at bailingoutbenji.com. They have the largest database in the country, and you can go to any state in the United States and find all that information. I have provided an example to everyone on the council. That's from Perfect Pets in Centennial. They source primarily from Nebraska Land Pets in Atkinson, Nebraska. They're a large-scale broker with an average of 300 dogs on site, and they also, other pet stores source from them. There are a multitude of pet supply stores with humane business models. For example, Wagon Wash is one of those, and I happen to be in the store and asked them what they make on a daily basis, and they said $4,000 to $6,000 per day, and that's only through grooming and pet supplies. So pet supply stores, grooming, those kind of things are very profitable. Stores don't have to sell live animals. An ordinance to ban the sale of puppies and kittens in pet stores in Longmont would only affect brick and mortar stores from opening and help to shrink the puppy mill industry. People can still buy their pets from reputable breeders, and reputable breeders don't sell their dogs to pet stores and third parties because they want to know what happens to their dog. They want to make sure it's in a good place. So I think my time's done. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Next, we have Thomas McBride. Thomas McBride, okay, very good, thank you.
Yes, Thomas McBride, 4875 South Balsam Way. Lauren has covered most of what I want to talk about, but I do want you to know, and if the clerk has not handed them out, I left a packet of information for each of you. And in that packet are one article that talks about 7,887 complaints against pet stores that have sold puppy mill puppies. 90%, up to 90% of the puppies sold in pet stores come from puppy mills. Also, as she said, there's 450 communities in the United States. There's also 7 states that bar the sale of puppies from through pet stores. Also, one of the articles talks about the financing that they use. Many states allow up to 188% interest if you finance your dog through a pet store. And one lady bought a dog for $3,000. The dog did not survive a year. She now owes $7,000 for a dog that has passed away. And the last thing is just an information sheet on our organization, Bailing Out Benji. Talks about our goals, and what we would like to do is see a more humane way for people to get their puppies and dogs. In Denver, there are many shelters, rescues that have maxed out. They cannot take any more dogs. And we euthanize 1 million dogs a year in the United States. And now these puppy mills are pumping out tens of thousands of dogs every year, and we don't need them. They're sick, they spread disease, they have genetic issues, that they've never been socialized. They can be, take up to a year to socialize them into a family. So, thank you, and I hope you will consider a ban on a pet selling puppies in pet stores here in Longmont. Thank you.
Thank you. Joe Kelly?
Good evening, City Council. My name is Doe Kelly, and I live on Barberry Drive. First thing I wanted to say is I continue to support a moratorium on the smart meters plus an opt-in program instead of an opt-out, with the choice to keep our trusted analog meters at no charge, especially to people like me with sensitivities to EMF and people with multiple chemical sensitivities who may all be triggered by wireless smart meters. Tonight, I'd like to ask my city council to help stop the proposed takeover by big government of local control by calling or contacting all local, state, and federal officials you're connected with to lobby against this very bad bill, H.R. 3557, the American Broadband Act of 2023. I'd like to read to you part of a recent blog post from Katie Singer, author of An Electronic Silent Spring with a site of the same name. Her post is titled, First Comes Love, Then Comes Unintended Consequences, Why We Need Due Diligence. I'm going to skip to the bottom after Katie described several publicly acknowledged incidences of unintended consequences, including the tearing down of 5,000 houses in Colorado and Utah in the 1950s because the building materials contained repurposed uranium tailings. I quote from Katie, when a child gets a smartphone or a laptop, they also get Instagram, Snapchat, and or TikTok. They're daily exposed to sexualized photos and suicide and eating disorder related content. How do today's parents refuse to allow tweens and teens smartphone access? With tax breaks supporting more electric vehicles, charging them overheats the nearby transformer and can shorten its life from 30 to 40 years to 3. Our grid's transformers were designed to cool down at night, not to charge multiple EVs. An LA friend recently told me that the transformer 50 feet from his house exploded on a Saturday morning, typically a time of low demand for electricity. But what happens if multiple EV owners charge on Friday night? And to the crux of this matter, Congress is now fast-tracking the American Broadband Deployment Act of 2023. If it passes, H.R. 3557 will allow unrestricted proliferation of cell towers and small cells near homes, schools, and playgrounds. Telecom facilities will be exempt from local and state regulations, the National Environmental Policy Act, and the National Historic Preservation Act. Preventing unintended consequences is much easier than remedying them, end quote. Please, City Council, do whatever you need to do today to stop this very bad bill from becoming law. I have a draft municipal resolution opposing it that I'm going to leave for you. There is a proposed
All right, thank you very
resolution.
much. Kimberly Edmondson.
Hello, I'm Kimberly Edmondson on Bittersweet Lane here in Longmont. I still oppose your meter plan, but you've made it quite clear through some of your public stuff here recently in the local newspapers that we are going full speed ahead with this plan. That being said, I hope that you do consider people like myself and Doe who are already sensitive to radiation and come up with a solution for us so we can live in this community without having our health impacted more drastically than it already is. Why can't you leave our current meters alone? Why do we have to be punished and penalized if we don't go along with it? And I noticed in some of your stuff here in the newspaper that about health impacts. There's none. You're still going along with it safe despite us trying to share many articles and stories and from experts in the field about potential harm. Recently, about 1,000 plus experts on EMFs got together and petitioned WHO to change the classification of EMF radiation or RF radiation from a class 2B possible carcinogen to a class 2A definite carcinogen. And I also noted that in this article here, I think it was from the Longmont Leader, about this updates, and you recommended people go to the Smart Energy Commission Collaborative. And I went to their website and I looked up some of their stuff about the WHO and human frequencies, and they talked about some really bogus stuff here I'd like to read. That RF emitted by meters is well below the limits set by the Federal Communication Commission's FCC. Well, here's the thing with FCC. The rest of the nations in the world are down here somewhere, and the FCC standards for what's safe is way up here, 10 to 100 times above what the rest of the world says is safe. So take that for what you will. It says here it's below levels produced by other household devices like cell phones, baby monitors, et cetera. In fact, you would have to be exposed to the RF meter for 375 years to get the dose equivalent to that of 1 year of 15 minutes per day cell phone use. Well, if that's the case, why are we still using cell phones? Why aren't we banning those if it's so bad? I mean, really, it makes no sense. And then they totally neglect the fact that children are way more susceptible to the effects of this radiation. Their bodies absorb way more due to their lack of mass and bone density. They don't have the fat to absorb it, most kids. It just goes right into them. Again, I think what the city needs to do is when people go to opt out, or when you send them a notification that their meter's going to be changed, you need to put on there could be potential health effects if you experience insomnia, headaches, and abnormal heart rhythms like I've had from EMFs, the Wi-Fi router. Please notify the city immediately so we can swap out your meter. Act like you care about your citizens, for Pete's sake. Because I feel like we've been here for 3 years squawking at you to like, hey, hold on, this stuff is questionably not safe. There needs to be more science. There was the FCC case you've been all made well aware of about how the science hasn't been done yet. So please consider possible solutions for people like myself.
All right, thank you. Jessica Knob.
Hi, my name is Jessica Nab. I'm at West 62nd Court. I'm here to ask you to please consider a preventative pet store ordinance. As you've heard, 12 municipalities in Colorado have already done so, and the majority of these are preventative, and that's because it's not affecting a business, and we don't want Longmont to ever be associated with puppy mills. And the reasons for enacting an ordinance to prohibit the retail sale of dogs and cats include stores are preying on customers' emotions to get the highest sales price possible, and then they push in-store financing with extraordinarily high interest rates. Stores are selling sick animals, burdening customers with vet bills on top of their purchase price. Stores have been known to sell a mixed breed at a purebred price. And the most pressing issue is that stores are sourcing from puppy mills, and it's not saying that these puppy mills are in your backyard or in anyone's backyard. They're primarily coming from out of state, and then they're being shipped into Colorado, and I can send you documentation on that. And so the state does not cover this issue. They do have something called PACFA, and what PACFA does is they have information that needs to be on cage cards of existing pet stores. And so they go in and they make sure the information is on those cage cards, but it is up to your animal control to go in and monitor these pet stores. There's no need to have animal control have anything else on their plates. There's also no need for shelters to have to compete with pet stores selling puppies. Pet store ordinance would only prohibit the retail sale of dogs and cats. It does not encroach on pet supply stores, nor would it prevent collaboration with local shelters for adoption events. It would also not affect responsible breeders, as they do not sell to pet stores. They sell to the public, and they care about their animals and passing on accurate information. This does not affect reptiles or any kind of livestock or anything like that either. Our concern is that a store selling dogs and cats will open here and create problems for the city and surrounding city. The sale of puppies and kittens brings controversial attention at best, resulting in all of these preemptive bans in cities that don't have pet stores yet. We just want to keep them out. Pet supply stores do not sell dogs and cats, and they remain lucrative businesses that do not draw negative attention and controversies such as protests that sometimes happen as frequently as twice a week. And we just want to ensure that Longmont does not become involved in supporting the puppy mill industry by allowing a pet store to sell dogs and cats to open here. And I can send you sample ordinances or documentation or anything like that. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Kara Thorson.
My name is Kara Thorson. I'm at 2703 Brush Creek Drive. I'm here to ask for an ordinance to be passed to prevent pet stores from selling cats and dogs. These pet stores primarily get their cats and dogs from puppy mills, kitten mills, which means for the breeding adult animals, which they have hundreds of, we're talking about very large scale commercial breeders. For those animals who spend their life in a cage, they never get their paws to touch the ground. They live a life of neglect and suffering while they're forced to produce litter after litter. So I ask you to please pass a ban on the sale of cats and dogs. Thank you.
Thank you. Jeremy Martinez.
Hi, and thank you for having me. Esteemed leaders of our city, today I stand before you to address...
Real quick, can you say your name and
Oh,
address?
sorry. I'm Jeremy Martinez, and I live at 919 Kane Drive here in Longmont. So I stand before you to address some pressing concerns, several concerns that have kind of gripped our community. It is our shared responsibility to confront these challenges head on and pave the way for a brighter, more equitable future for all our citizens. Firstly, we must acknowledge the looming shadow of large companies monopolizing apartment complexes in our city. This monopolization not only restricts housing options, but also drives up rental prices, leaving countless families struggling to secure affordable homes. Reports from reputable sources such as Bloomberg and Forbes have shed light on this troubling trend, urging us to take action immediately. In tandem with this concern, we must address the adverse effects of wealthy homeowners purchasing inexpensive properties and land. Their actions have led to inflated property taxes, making home ownership for myself and others an elusive dream for many hardworking families. The wealth gap widens every day, and social inequality deepens as a result. The Wall Street Journal and the National Association of Realtors have highlighted this trend, calling for an intervention to ensure fairness in our housing market. Furthermore, the rental crisis and the lack of adequate compensation for American workers have become a stark reality for millions of Americans. It's basically turned into a dystopian society, practically. The Pew Research Center and Bureau of Labor Statistics have documented the struggle of hardworking individuals who, despite their toil, their hard work, their sweat and blood put into their work, are burdened with exorbitant rental costs that consume a substantial portion of their income. This financial burden hampers their ability to prosper and achieve a better quality of life for themselves and their families. Moreover, we can't ignore the alarming disparity in how the justice system has been corrupted by how fines and penalties affect different economic strata. While the wealthy perceive these consequences as mere inconveniences, the poor and working class suffer from disproportionately from their weight of the fines they receive, from speeding tickets, parking tickets, anything like that. A wealthy millionaire or someone with a high amount of wealth can park in a handicapped spot, just $100 mere inconvenience to them. While the wealthy perceive these consequences, to overcome these challenges, I am being constructive, I do have a couple solutions here. So a rent-to-own solution for apartments and condos. We can break the chains of monopolization by legislating that large companies offer rent-to-own options for their apartment units. By empowering tenants to gradually build equity in their homes, we create a path to home ownership and promote a sense of community and stability for the long term.
Thank you, and you might consider also sending your comments to us since you didn't quite get through them.
Okay, sounds good.
Thank you. Clark Allen.
Clark Allen of the Greens. The reason I wore a mask tonight is a bit of a demonstration about the poor air quality that we have in the Front Range. I could not ride my bicycle here tonight because I cannot take the air quality that's out there. But what I really want to do is bring your focus back to all of the things that seem to be left undone in Longmont and that we don't seem to focus on. We seem to spend a lot of time talking about affordable housing, but not these unfinished projects. And let's talk about one really simple one. The bicycle trail over by Left Hand Canyon has been unfinished since 2013. And I know you always have excuses of why they don't done. The noise and lead pollution that exists in this town, specifically the noise. We have no quiet zones yet. We have good excuses of why we don't have them. And the lead pollution produced by the airport. The simple fact is the airport industry is the largest contributor to lead pollution in the United States now. We could solve that problem by simply not selling leaded fuel gas. Now that means some of these planes could not take off anymore, but we could sure solve that problem. The next thing is we don't have any light rail. Why? We have lots of excuses of why not. We've spent tens of millions of dollars towards this. And we hear lots of talk from politicians about the fact that we are going to move forward and get this solved. And every time I turn around and vote for one of you for this reason, it never gets done. The next thing is, what about the money we got from the Broncos? Seems like we're still sitting on that and haven't done anything with that. Watched a lot of programs about what we could do, what we might do, and it went by the wayside. And now we find out that we have no money for the seniors. Now, granted, I'm a senior. I don't use that facility, but there are a lot of people that I personally know do and are part of it. Now, one of my favorite movies is Rudy, and I love the priest's statement which says, after 35 years of studying in the priesthood, he came across two hard, undisputable facts. Number one is that there is a God, and it's not him. I actually think he got it wrong. There's a third one. Doesn't matter how many facts you present to a politician, they will never change their mind. Doesn't matter how good your facts are, and it also, anything that's undone, there's always an excuse on why it can't be done. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. As that was the last name on the list, I will now close the first call, public invited to be heard. Let the record show that Mayor Peck has now joined us in council chambers, and I will, as such, turn over the meeting to her to start on item 9, the consent agenda.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem Rodriguez, for handling this meeting, starting as I was at the RTD board meeting, testifying to get our LX1 bus back as well as our LD buses, because we definitely need them in Longmont. It was received quite well, actually, so I was pleased at that. So we are at the consent agenda. Dawn, would you mind reading the consent agenda into the record?
Absolutely, Mayor Peck. The ordinances on first reading tonight will be on second reading and public hearing on August 8th, 2023. Item 9A is ordinance 2023-31, a bill for an ordinance making additional appropriations for expenses and liabilities of the city of Longmont for the fiscal year beginning January 1st, 2023. 9B is ordinance 2023-32, a bill for an ordinance conditionally approving the vacation of 1 irrigation ditch easement, 2 water line easements, and 2 utility easements generally located on 2 parcels south of East Rogers Road, east of Martin Street, and north of East 2nd Avenue. 9C is ordinance 2023-33, a bill for an ordinance conditionally approving the vacation of a portion of public right-of-way known as East Second Avenue, generally located at the eastern terminus of East Second Avenue, south of East Rogers Road and east of Martin Street. 9D is ordinance 2023-34, a bill for an ordinance conditionally approving the vacation of a portion of public right-of-way known as East Rogers Road, generally located east of Martin Street, west of Lashley Street, and north of East Second Avenue. 9E is Resolution 2023-59, a resolution of the Longmont City Council approving the intergovernmental agreement between the city and the Colorado Department of Transportation for grant funding for high-visibility impaired driving enforcement. 9F is approve amendments to City Council's rules of procedure. And 9G is approve 5 capital improvement program amendments.
Thank you, Dawn. See, Counselor Waters.
Thanks, Mayor Peck. I'd like to pull item F, 9F, off the consent agenda.
Would you mind making the motion then to approve?
I'll move the consent agenda minus or with item F withdrawn for consideration later.
Thank you. Second. All right, that's been moved by Counselor Waters, seconded by Counselor Hidalgo. Faring, let's vote.
And Mayor, Councilmember McCoy is remote. I'm not seeing his vote. I don't.
He has a thumbs
He
up.
gave a thumbs up. I can't see it.
Is
Thank
that a
you.
yes?
I'm in support.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So that passes unanimously. Thank you. We are now at, turn this over. We're on ordinances on second reading and public hearings on any matter tonight. I'm a little amazed because this is a short agenda and I expected a presentation in the middle of it, but we do not have one. So 10A is ordinance 2023-28. It's a bill for an ordinance making additional appropriations for expenses and liabilities of the City of Longmont for the fiscal year beginning January 1st, 2023. Do we have any questions from councilors? Seeing none, I will open up the public meeting on this ordinance. Is there anybody in the public that would like to speak on ordinance 2023-28? Seeing no one, I'll close the public hearing and ask for a motion to pass and adopt 2023-28.
So moved.
Second.
So it's been moved by Councilor Waters, seconded by Mayor Pro Tem Rodriguez. Let's vote. Is that a thumbs up from you, Councilor McCoy? Thank you.
I do have a vote from Councilmember McCoy. I'm not seeing Councilmember Martins enter. If you'd like to verbalize. Oh, there we go. Thank you.
That passes unanimously. 10B is 0-2023-29, a bill for an ordinance conditionally approving the 150 Francis Street annexation, generally located in the southeast quarter of Section 4, Township 2 North, Range 69 West of the 6th PM, and zoning the property RMN Residential Mixed Neighborhood. It looks like we do have a presentation. Are there any questions from councilors on this, first of all? No? Okay, thank you.
Mayor Peck, I do have a presentation.
Great.
It's kind of hidden behind the Zoom meeting.
Dallas has come down to help me because you know I need it.
It's the one that says, yeah, there, it's up here. It should be that one. Thank you. Thank you, Mayor Peck, members of the City Council, Don Burchett with Planning and Development Services. I'm here tonight to talk to you about a proposed annexation of the 150 Francis Street property. The City Council has already considered the first and second resolutions finding the statutory compliance and finding that the property could be annexed. Tonight you are going to consider the annexation ordinance along with adoption of the concept plan and the annexation agreement. So I'm here tonight to give you a quick overview of the annexation, get you up to speed on some of the concerns from the neighbors, and then the applicant has their consultant here tonight with a brief presentation as well. And then the council can have the public hearing on the item. So I will begin. The proposal itself is an annexation of 2.26 acres and consists of the property that's known as 150 Francis Street. The area that's going to be annexed, which I will show you a map here in a second, contains 1 acre for the actual property where 2 existing homes are located, as well as 1.26 acres of right-of-way, which includes a portion of Spruce Avenue and then the Francis Street right-of-way. No development is currently proposed on this property at this time. Again, there are 2 homes that exist on the property. The applicant is asking that the property be annexed with the RMN zoning district, which would be residential mixed neighborhood, which is our medium density land use. The way that the concept plan and the annexation agreement are written is that if anybody were to try to do any development on that property other than the 2 existing single-family homes, they would have to come back to the City Council and ask to amend the concept plan. So there would be a public hearing and notice to the neighbors, and then the council at that time would decide whether or not to approve any changes to the use of that property from the existing 2 single-family homes. Up on the screen right now, you have a vicinity map on the left and then a blown-up copy of the annexation map itself on the right-hand side. The property is located in the Bond Farm neighborhood over on the historic west side of town. It's south of Spruce. And again, it includes a portion of Spruce Avenue right-of-way that is currently in Boulder County. It includes all of the Francis Street annexation, or the Francis Street right-of-way, and those rights-of-way on the right, map on the right, are shown in red. There is also a little bit of an old street that was identified back in the late 1800s on the south side of the property, down as we get down here along the bottom of the blue here. The blue outline shows the 1 acre that contains 2 lots that are in Boulder County that have the 2 homes on them. Jumped ahead. Again, current conditions: 2 existing single-family homes, 1 built in 1930, the other built in 1971. Both of the existing homes are on septic systems, as well as the other areas that are developed along that street, along Francis. There's several small sheds, fences, and other outbuildings, accessory buildings on the property. Some of those are located in the existing right-of-way, and as I will talk about at the end of my presentation, there are requirements within the annexation agreement that those buildings and those improvements will be removed at the city's request when we ask for that to be done. So that's a condition within the annexation agreement. Again, the map is the annexation map that you saw before, a little bit larger view of the entire area. The DRC reviewed this. This is the Design Development Review Committee with the city, made up of the various city departments that check this for conformance to the state statutes, as well as to our annexation review criteria and the general review criteria of the Land Development Code. We found that those all were met, and that was explained previously when we looked at the resolutions for compliance with state statute. The annexation also included some environmental analysis, as well as we looked at utility, drainage, and emergency services provisions for this through the DRC review. The annexation review process, the first thing that I want to again remind the council is that annexation is discretionary. There is nothing that requires the city council to annex this property. This is completely the choice of the council, whether it meets the review criteria, whether it's eligible for annexation or not. It's totally up to the city council and your discretion. Back in February of 2021, you heard a referral for this annexation and told the city staff that we could process this through our DRC process. So we held a neighborhood meeting in June of 2021 to kick that process off. We had our formal annexation application was submitted in October of 21. We began the DRC review process, and as we started to near the public hearing for the Planning and Zoning Commission, we re-noticed the neighborhood since it had been almost 2 years since we had told the people of the application. So we wanted to give them a heads up, plenty of time to be able to know about it. And then we also noticed again for the Planning and Zoning Commission hearing in February. And we are here tonight with City Council for the public hearing to decide whether or not to annex this property. We have received some neighborhood concerns at your dais tonight. I included 5 copies of information that was submitted. 3 came in late this afternoon, 1 came in closer to around noon this afternoon, and then another one after the packet had been issued. All of them speak about various things that they have concerns with. I've tried to summarize those as well as some of the others that we have heard through this process on the screen. One of the questions is the need for this annexation. One of the reasons that the applicant noted that they would like to be annexed is they would like to tie into the sewer when it becomes available with the development of the Bond Farm. This property is adjacent to the Bond Farm development. The Bond Farm development is to the east of this property and adjacent to it. They will be bringing in sewer to that property when it develops. They would like to have access to it. The neighbors have pointed out, and correctly, is that there is not necessarily a requirement to annex to get a sewer tap from the city. We do allow outside sewer tap agreements. Those also have to be approved by the city council, but that is an option which the neighbors have pointed out. The neighbors are also concerned about if redevelopment occurs, the traffic impacts to the neighborhood, to Spruce, as that's the only way out is to come up Francis to Spruce Street. And then another item is the question of, is this development, is this property related to the Bond Farm annexation? None of the information that we have seen relates to the Bond Farm other than they are adjacent to each other and they hope to benefit from the extension of the sewers up from First Avenue up to the north to the Bond Farm. The current Francis Street is a dirt road. They've raised questions about concerns for the cost to the city to maintain that, as well as some of the concerns with emergency services and provisions of services on that road. The final item that was raised has been some of the questions about code violations on the property and whether those would be cleaned up and whether or not that would be something for the city that we would inherit. I currently do not know of any violations other than the non-conforming structures that we noted earlier that are built in the right-of-way that we have addressed in the annexation agreement to have those removed at the city's request. The Planning and Zoning Commission reviewed this in February of this year. They voted 6-1 to recommend approval of the annexation to the City Council. And tonight, the City Council needs to hold a public hearing on this annexation and consider Ordinance 2023-29, the annexation, which would include the concept plan approval and then the annexation agreement. I've also pointed out 5 of the items that are spelled out specifically to address some of the concerns that the DRC identified. The first, again, is the removal of any non-conforming structures from the property at the city's discretion of when that happens. The second is that the non-conforming property cannot be conveyed prior to development, so that it could not be sold in pieces to somebody. They would have to go through a process, through the development process, which would subject them to our regulations. Third is that the owner must maintain the septic system until the sewer is available, and when they do connect, they need to remove that per the Boulder County requirements for removing that septic system. Private waste management will continue on the property as that's a dirt road and there is currently no turnaround at the bottom of that street. The DRC has identified that private waste management should continue to that as it currently is. And then finally, the property is subject to the city's affordable housing regulations. So any future development that would occur on that would be subject to the regulations in effect at that time. That is the end of my presentation. I'm happy to answer any questions that you have now. And again, the applicant does have their consultant here who does have a brief presentation for you.
Counselor Hidalgo-Ferring.
Thank you. Yeah, this one was a tough one for me because the location, I'm generally in support of annexations, sorry. However, considering the area and just the fragile nature of that particular area, the narrowed streets, the infrastructure in that place, I've been, kind of mulling it around for quite some time. And then, just kind of analyzing the emails we've gotten, the calls, the, expression of concern. So, so if I heard you correctly, the owner would be able to tap into tap into the sewer line without an annexation.
Councilmember Hidalgo-Ferring, that is correct.
Okay, and then the other piece in our council communication, when we were looking at the natural resource assessment and the environmental assessment, it looked like one, it wasn't done. Was not conducted on the property. So looking at the environmental impacts. So that one had me kind of concerned. It was on the page 5 of the council communication. At the very bottom. So even though it said it would not adversely affect surrounding properties, there wasn't an environmental assessment done on the property. And then the natural resource assessment would only be done if future development would occur, so.
Yeah. Councilmember Hidalgo-Ferring, so there's two items here. So the first is that we're required to do an environmental assessment, which is looking for contamination of the property, the phase 1. Okay. And that's at the bottom of that page. The environmental assessment that's required was completed, but you're correct, the natural resource assessment from the standpoint of, are there any endangered species or what's gonna happen? Are the trees needing to be saved? At this time, since there's no proposal for development, we have pushed that off until development would occur. And the reason that we typically do that is that when there is no development proposal currently proposed, those reports are gonna have to be updated after about 6 months anyway with a development application. So while we could have asked for one based on its location and just knowing the results of the Bond Farm, which again, just about touches this property, other than the alley right of way that's between, there's nothing been identified by staff in that area for us to look at.
Okay.
So
and then you would have to look at it again.
And then we'd have to redo it again. So,
I understand.
in a manner of, we did not identify a reason to require that at this time, knowing that we could get it again at time of proposed development, and then we would evaluate it on those current circumstances.
Okay, thank you. And I didn't misspeak on the,
No,
I knew that was
you're good.
one of them.
No, you're good.
And so I just threw them all out there.
You're good.
Counselor Waters.
Thanks, Mayor Peck. Don, are there health and safety concerns with the current status of a dirt road and occupants in homes along that dirt road? If there's a fire, who would respond? Would our fire department respond?
Councilmember Waters. Oh, if you want to.
Okay, Harold?
So
that's you.
Well, how about I do this? I'll start and we'll tag team
All right,
it, and
okay.
then if we need, we have Assistant Chief Goldman
Well,
here
I know
to also.
Assistant Chief Goldman here.
Yeah, and so she'll throw something at me if I mess up. But the city has a mutual aid agreement with Mountain View Fire. So currently, while it's in Boulder County, if Mountain View Fire could not get there, the city of Longmont would respond to that in its current situation, whether it's in the city or not.
And go ahead. I'm sorry. I don't mean to.
And so whether the property, if the property were annexed, it would become obviously ours to always respond to first, because it would be within our city limits. We would still have the same concerns or issues that we do today with all of the homes that are along Francis Street with that not being paved.
So would we prefer, would our public safety department both police and fire, prefer that we have dirt streets that are narrow, that can't be accessed by safety vehicles and personnel? Whose interest is that in?
Councilman Waters, I'll let the assistant chief answer that one. I'm not going to speak for her on that.
That's a wise response. I wouldn't either.
Mayor Peck, Council, Assistant Chief Michelle Goldman. I function as the fire marshal for the city. I can't speak for police on their preference. We have not had that discussion yet, but the dirt road situation would not meet current code in our city. As part of an annexation, it would be okay because it's an as-is situation. But if development were to occur, that is the time we would evaluate and remedy the street situation. It doesn't put us at the best advantage to fight a fire or to, afford a medical call. But that is the existing situation, and as Don mentioned, we do have an auto aid agreement already with Mountain View Fire in place, so the closest unit would go.
Yeah, which would be ours.
Which would be ours.
Wouldn't be
Right,
Mountain View.
it would be us.
And whether or not this is annexed, is health and safety a concern for you to send firefighters down that road under the current conditions?
I would probably say yes. It's definitely, like I said, doesn't put us at a position of good advantage to work from. And I know there's area down there to work with to give us some better advantage. There's some easements that we could possibly use as a turnaround or as a hammerhead down there. So we would be looking at some of those if it were to annex, or even probably have those discussions with Mountain View first, because it's right now it's theirs to tell us what we have to work with. So,
thank you.
Thank you.
So before I give up the floor, I guess back to Don. If we choose not to annex, if we choose not to act on this, on the recommendation from planning and zoning, we leave a situation in that part of town that sounds to me like is a health and safety concern. And the only way for the city of Longmont to address that is through the annexation. Is that correct? Otherwise, it's county property, and it's up to the county.
Councilman Waters, I think you're correct.
Thanks. That's all I need to know. Thanks.
So I do have a couple of, Sean, Councilman McCoy, you're on.
Thank you, Mayor Peck. I just had similar questions of that Councilmember Hidalgo Faring had, and what were brought what was brought to us from some of the neighbors in regards to that. But you answered most of them. The issue is just reiterating that we could go ahead and provide them a sewer tap and anything else like that without annexation. Now, right now, the status quo in regards to health and safety has been this way for decades, right? In regards to that, there's been no change in that. We always had a dirt road there, and that was something that we were going to address if there was an emergency at that location.
Councilmember McCoy, you're correct.
Thank you. That's all I needed to know. Thank you. Thank you, Mayor Peck.
Sure. So I have a couple of questions. Based upon these two conversations, we could, with the county, work, to address the size of that road with the easements that the deputy chief brought up. So to me, those are two separate issues, because the annexation, from what I'm reading up here, the concern is about Bond Farm, but we don't know what the concept plan for Bond Farm is going to be at this point, do we? Because it was put on hold through the Planning and Zoning Commission. So if we're basing that decision upon the concept plan that the developer already put in for Bond Farm, we're not sure if that's what it's going to be the next time they come before Planning and Zoning. I think that regardless of whether it's annexed, we should actually get with the county and ask about widening that road if it's concerned, whether it's annexed or not. So my vote is going to be that we wait, number one, to see what is going to happen with Bond Farm concept plan and development. They can get on the sewer system. As you have said, it doesn't need to be annexed to do that. And perhaps look at the safety of that road in a different discussion. Because it has to be safe regardless of what we do in the annexation process. So I personally would just like to put this on hold until some of those questions are answered. Councilor Martin.
Thank you, Mayor Peck. It was my understanding from what Mr. Burchett said that the Bond Farm concept plan doesn't have anything to do with this annexation, other than if it's developed, it will make it easier to provide sewer lines.
Mayor Peck, Councilmember Martin, you're correct. The development of Bond Farm brings the utilities up through that corridor between the two properties that would allow them to connect. So but it is dependent upon the development of Bond Farm bringing that utility from the south up to the property.
And so, is it also true that unless Bond Farm is developed, there would be no opportunity for these two local residents to get city sewer, whether we do the annexation or not?
Mayor Peck, Councilmember Martin, I know Jim is in the audience, Jim Angstedt from Public Works, and he could maybe add to this. But if they were to lose their their septic system, then the state requirement of being within a certain distance would kick in for them to have to tie into the sewer system, which is down at the end of First Avenue, which is, I would guess, quite a few hundred feet away. So I don't know that they would be within that required distance to have to tie in. But they could work with the property owner that's directly south of them between First Avenue and their property to acquire easements to be able to build and construct that sewer line up to their property. So it's not beholden only on Bond Farm. They are trying to benefit from the development of the Bond Farm, but if push came to shove, they could too develop that sewer line and bring it up to their property.
And who pays for what under these circumstances?
They would be required to pay for any of the extension of that utility, including easements, acquisition, construction.
And so that's true regardless of where the connection comes from.
That's correct.
It's just cheaper if it's Bond Farm's infrastructure.
Correct, because then you're only usually paying back for your adjacency for that portion that is adjacent to your property when you tie into it versus the entire length of the line.
Okay. I think that, to me, that's the crux of the matter. I don't really much like the idea of having septic tanks right in the middle of the city and in the watershed, as it were. So I'm certainly going to vote yes. But thank you for that clarification.
You're welcome.
Yeah, I want to add, I think there's a nuance to this. The septic system has to be failing for them to connect into the system. And so only under a failing condition can they connect into the sewer line. And I just looked at it in the ordinance. I think there was some information I wanted to clarify with you all on that. So if it's not failing, then per our ordinance, we reject those applications. So it has to be in a failing condition to connect to the sewer system.
For the outside sewer tower.
Yeah.
So I would like actually to have the public hearing on this and listen to what the public has to say first. The other thing is that, for clarification, Harold, even if the Bond Farm septic system came up to that house, would that septic system that they have to be failing before they could? So it doesn't matter. It has to be failing regardless.
If it's in the county, if it's in the county,
It has to be.
it says applications for sewer service for properties that will not be developed beyond the existing use of land have a failing septic system. Section B says the council presumes that other applications for water or sewer service outside the city limits will not clearly benefit the inhabitants of the city. Upon receipt of such an application, staff shall reject the application and shall not process or consider it further unless directed otherwise by the council in this. And so it really is the failing condition that will allow them to connect into our sewer service.
Okay. I'm going to open up the public part of this. Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
The applicant does have their representative here. Who
Oh,
does
that's
have a
right.
presentation, so.
Great. Thank you. Let's do with that.
Hi, everyone. Can you guys hear me okay?
We can.
Sharon Procopio, 1319 Spruce Street in Boulder. I work for JVA. And I'm here today on behalf of Tonya Pulfer and Mark von Wagner, who are not with us, but they are watching from afar. So they are waving virtually. And we are just going to give a brief overview. I think a lot of what you've already heard from Don is kind of repeated here, but I'm available for questions as well. So 150 and 150 and a half Francis Street, they're both residential properties with 2 dwellings on the property. Both the dwellings are currently 2-bedroom, 1-bath houses. They have the shed, carport, and some tool shacks. And as Don mentioned, anything that's a non-compliance as part of this annexation is going to be addressed. Just from an exhibit standpoint, I think Don had these pulled up as well. We're basically talking, this is the survey, so you can kind of see the existing 2 houses in this area. If my mouse is showing up, it is. And then the septic system is basically to the south of the 2 homes. Oh, can you guys not hear me? Oh, sorry. So the 2 houses are right here on the screen. And then this area down to the south here is the septic system. So that septic system, as I think mentioned, they'd like to eventually discontinue it. It is an older septic system, but it is functioning right now. They did dedicate easements to Bond Farm as part of their development to allow that future sanitary sewer line to take place. So there's already easements dedicated on the property for when that will happen. And that was one of the things that precipitated them wanting to have this ability to be part of the city, among other things. But that was what precipitated some of that. Their eventual goal is to retire their 50-year-old septic system and connect to the city's sanitary once they have a main. They understand that they can't do that until that main exists. They did dedicate the easements, as I just mentioned, to pass through the property. They're adjacent to the alleys. So if I go back for a moment, oops, can I go back? Previous. There we go. So effectively, this is the alley on this side, and they have dedicated a portion of an easement to allow sanitary through their property down towards the the property to their south as well, the Hildebrand property. So they're looking forward to finalizing this process, and they're fully prepared when it's time to connect as feasible. And they've been working on this process since 2021. And, here we are a couple years later, finally getting through that process. So they're very excited to be at this point to hear council's questions and the public comment and hear your decision. They are not proposing any development, and I think that's an important thing to emphasize. This is really just them thinking for long-term for the property. And do you guys have any questions?
Seeing none, thank you very much.
Thank you.
I'm going to open up the public hearing at this point. The first one on the list is Mark Danielson. Oh, I'm sorry. Councilor McCoy, did you have a question or a comment?
No.
Okay.
Did I have my hand up? No.
No,
I'm sorry. No.
someone in the, okay, I see. Thank you for pointing that out. Charles Schilling.
Hello, my name is Charles Schilling, and I live at 224 Francis Street. Thank you for allowing me to speak to you tonight. I'm speaking about the annexation, and forgive some of the overlap, but Don Burchett got some of my comments and covered them very nicely. So you'll see a little bit of overlap here. So the property owner is asking for annexation for a sewer tap. The fact is the city does not have to annex a property to provide a sewer tap. The city can just give them the right to a sewer tap. Don confirmed this, and also some of this discussion here was a little confusing because the city engineer, Chris Huffer, confirmed that there are over 100 sewer taps serving county residents today. So I don't know if all those failed and they came in, but there's a ton of precedence for this idea of providing a sewer tap without being annexed, over 100. So I understand the property owner's done a lot of work to get to this point, but that should not be part of the decision to annex. There's no need for an annexation just to get a sewer tap. And there's, as I mentioned, a lot of precedent here. Don mentioned the ordinance. The annexation is discretionary. It's up to you all. It's a legislative act, and the city should never be compelled to annex unless otherwise required by law. In fact, 2 council members voted against it in the first review of this, and one of the P&Z commissioners voted against it because they said the property was a mess. The city council communication form for this ordinance shows no fiscal impact or fund source for this annexation. There's a big fat NA on it. Yet the city's taking on the challenge of a dirt road with a steep grade, and the property has other risks that we really don't know that much about right now. The city can't provide city services efficiently to this property. If annexed, it's immediately probably code enforcement time in dealing with new city issues, causing the city money harm with no budget for it. This is a fiscal problem for the city. Regarding the neighbors, I was able to speak with most of the neighbors down in that section of the road on Francis Street, and none of them that I was able to speak with want this annexation. So we realize this property and others like it will be annexed and developed sometime in the future. But this one seems to be overkill and not harmless. We're asking the city to provide only a sewer tap at this time, or a sewer tap right at this time, so the city can figure out how to properly annex this property while also addressing compatibility and traffic issues for the broader neighborhood. In summary, the city council is well within their right to vote no on this and provide only the sewer tap permit, or whatever you call it. The annexation will cause harm to the city and cost us an undue financial burden that's not budgeted. Cities don't want it. I ask you, please vote no on this annexation. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. John Pillman.
John Pillman, 1303 Spruce Avenue. Thank you for allowing me to talk this evening. According to a traffic study commissioned by a developer with a property adjacent to 150 Francis, a 70-unit housing development would increase daily trip volume on Spruce Avenue by 32%. And if the city annexes 150 Francis and the owner provides a concept plan for 18 new housing units, that's another 8% increase in daily trip volume on Spruce Avenue. And when the 4 remaining acres on that South Francis get annexed and developed under an RMN zoning designation, that could be another 72 units, resulting in another 33% increase in traffic volume on Spruce Avenue. You add it all up, those examples above, 73% increase in traffic on Spruce Avenue. And for over 75% of the length of Spruce Avenue. So that's the section of Spruce between Grant down to Sunset. There are no through streets that go south. For those streets, the only option is Spruce Avenue. And what about the 86 homes that exists on Vivian and Judson south of Spruce, whose only exit point is, you guessed it, Spruce Avenue? What happens to traffic volume when a significant percentage of those homeowners decide to build an ADU, duplex, or triplex on their RMN designated properties? Further development in that area could move the needle to over 100% cumulative increase in today's traffic volume on Spruce and surrounding streets. We should all be concerned that the projected traffic volume increases for this and other annexations will push traffic levels past the safe limits of Spruce and surrounding streets. What is not a projection, however, and is that the city has already given legal rights to the 86 homeowners on Vivian, Judson, Donovan, and Green Place to expand the number of units, housing units, which will add significant traffic volume to Spruce Avenue and surrounding streets. So here's my question. Has the city done any analysis of the cumulative impact wrought by these projected traffic increases in the Bond Farm neighborhood? Keeping in mind that these streets can't be widened, in many cases don't have contiguous sidewalks, and already are narrower than city standards on for local streets. I'm asking the city to hold off on any further annexing in the Bond Farm neighborhood or approving any further infill development until a comprehensive study can be completed to determine the potential impact of these traffic volumes to the safety of our neighborhood. As others have noted, you can grant the owner of 150 Francis a sewer tap without requiring annexation. It's been done in the past and should be done in this situation as well. I recommend that you vote no on the 150 Francis annexation. Thank you.
Thank you, John. Mark Danielson.
Good evening, Mayor, council members. My name is Mark Danielson. I live at the corner of Spruce and Lincoln, and I urge you this evening to vote no on the annexation of 150 Francis. As you know, it's been said multiple times tonight, annexation is discretionary. It's up to your individual judgment whether this is a good idea for the city at this time. You are not bound by the recommendation of P&Z. What you are bound by is ensuring that any annexations that are approved will not cause the city any harm. Do no harm. Unfortunately, this annexation is ill-timed and ill-conceived and brings serious financial and liability risks to the city. If you've not personally seen the stretch of Francis that gives access to this property, you probably should not be voting for this annexation this evening. Envision a steep, narrow dirt road descending from Spruce that can only handle one direction at a time and has no outlet and no turnaround at the end. Because of the steepness at the top of the hill, it's nearly impossible to see traffic as you're entering Spruce from Francis. Private trash trucks wanting to service this address currently have to back down the dirt road for several hundred feet since there's no room at the bottom to turn around. This application cobs together a workaround for this. Homeowners will continue to use private waste service until the road is improved. Clearly, this is a tacit admission that the city is unable to provide services efficiently to this address. But if it can't even provide trash services, which need just a single truck, what about emergency services? A series of fire trucks, police cars, ambulances, there responding to an emergency? It's a recipe for disaster in summer, but imagine it in winter when the steep road is icy. If this doesn't sound like a monstrous liability for the city, then you've not seen this street. If basic services cannot be provided effectively today, then today is not the time to annex this property. If you do, you're merely accumulating liability risks with no clear offsetting assets. As the fire marshal has clarified this evening, that liability is currently borne by the county. Why take it on unnecessarily? This property has what's been acknowledged as an ancient septic system that could turn into an environmental hazard at any time. If the owner were to declare bankruptcy before the sewer connection is made, and there's no saying when that connection will be made, the environmental liability belongs to the city. Longmont has enough liabilities to manage without adding frivolously to the risks we take on. Do no harm. please say no to the annexation this evening. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. Jeffrey Rogers.
Mayor Peck, City Council members. I'm Jeffrey Rogers. I live across the street from the property in question. I live at 177 Francis Street. I'm here with my neighbor, Marcia, who lives next door to me at 179. I have moved there in 1981. It was always a dirt road, a very narrow one at that. Spruce Avenue is also a very narrow street. Years ago, there is a property at the end of Francis Street, a 4-acre parcel of land that was under consideration for annexation back in around the turn of the century. It was a 4-acre parcel of land. A developer tried to build 28 dwelling units on it, and our neighborhood group fought this development for a period of almost 2 years, with the result being that the whole entire neighborhood that was in question was rezoned from R2 to what was then RMD. The question here was a question of density. The R1 neighborhood to the north of Spruce Avenue had a density of 5 units to the acre. R2 had a density of 10 units to the acre. And at that time, we got a review of the neighborhood zoning, which was then changed to RMD. Now, I don't know where this other zoning, when that happened, that would allow a huge increase in density to the neighborhood. But with narrow streets, with Francis Street being, you know, way less than what the city standard was, a city standard street is 60 feet wide. There is no way Francis Street could accommodate that kind of width. Spruce Avenue doesn't even have that. So just to echo what some of the other people have already said, there's the liability issue that the city would take on will not give you any benefits. With regard to some point in the future, the city will take on all of this area. You will have a problem with Francis Street. I have 4-wheel drive. Most of my neighbors have all-wheel drive, and that's how we negotiate that road. So thank you for your consideration.
Thank you, Jeffrey. Tom Walther.
Hello, my name is Tom Walther. I live at 1305 Spruce Avenue. From my perspective, annexing the property at 150 Francis Street at this time will only compound a series of unsound decisions that can only lead to unwanted consequences for the city and degrade the quality of life in the neighborhood, an outcome no one who cares about life in this city wants. It has been increasingly apparent that the city decision-making process capable of making decisions in the development of special locations like the RMN zone in the Bonfon neighborhood south of Spruce Avenue, as long as the RMN zoning parameters permit an enormously wide range of density possibilities without consideration of the unique infill challenges in established neighborhoods. giving permission for dramatically increasing density without facing the on-the-ground reality of the place and the quality of life in the neighborhood is short-sighted. What is special about the RMN zone in Bond Farm neighborhood? Access to approximately 75% of the RMN zoned region of the neighborhood can only be accessed by Spruce Avenue, with no outlets to the east, west, or south. It is surrounded by railroad tracks and residential property on the south side, and on the other three sides, it's all residential. There's no way for traffic to gracefully flow through. There are no plans, design, or funding for creating such access. Given this reality, there's no need or justification for ultra-high density development in this location. The problems we have today are part of our legacy of people doing their best to enhance the quality of their lives as best they knew how. The decision-making and social structures of our city are not working well. Perhaps the council should prioritize investigating sound decision-making that includes opportunities to test proposed decisions, a mechanism to reevaluate actual impacts to the neighborhood as new data emerges from neighbors and the planning process. Some of this new data could be completely unanticipated and unforeseen. This new data, testing, learning, and evaluation would then allow for making adjustments as necessary. The power of adjustment is an important step toward creating anything, including an outstanding future. Perhaps a good place to start is with a conversation that includes the institution of the city and community about the possibility of changing the RMN zoning south of Spruce Avenue, or developing a new zoning entity, perhaps called infill zone, that takes into account compatibility with the established neighborhoods, a place to start so council can make decisions that are socially, financially, and environmentally sound, short and long term, about annexation of property and development in this area. Thank you.
Thank you, Tom. Polly Christensen. Polly Christensen.
My name is Polly Christensen. I live at 410 Judson Street. Good evening, Mayor and councilors. This proposed annexation of 150 Francis first came before council in May 2021 when I was serving on council. I voted against it, but nevertheless, it moved forward. The recent hearing by Planning and Zoning also resulted in non-unanimous decision, yet here we are tonight. Lower St. Francis Street is a unique part of this neighborhood, unpaved, peaceful, full of independent people. Over the last 30 years, I've spoken to probably everyone on this street at one time or another, and have yet to meet anyone who wanted this street annexed, rezoned, and paved. To imagine that the New York State landlords only want to annex this so they can get a sewer tap is nonsensical. They can already do that, as has been confirmed, as have over 100 other properties in Longmont. This annexation and the accompanying rezoning to residential mixed use, RMN, will add enormously to the resale value. The rezoning to MRN is inexplicable. This rezoning is only possible because of the adjacent Bone Farm property, which was rezoned as RMN in error. This was illegal spot zoning. RMN requires that the property be contiguous with other mixed-use property. Bone Farm is completely surrounded by modest 1- or 2-story residential homes. The original variance was granted to create a sort of new housing in Longmont, co-housing, yet that never happened, nor did the project actually unfold to meet any of the criteria of genuine co-housing community. This rezoning to MNN was an error. This error needs to be corrected, not made worse by expanding it. Longmont's deeply flawed Envision Longmont comp plan says the area, quote, has been planned for urban development since the 1970s, unquote. This is shocking news to those of us who have invested our lives and our life savings in our modest homes in quiet neighborhoods. We now realize that all areas of the town, not under the rule of HOAs, especially Old Town East Side and West Side, are expected to bear the burden of neighborhood destruction while the newer, wealthier neighborhoods are untouched. It is not council's job to improve the profitability of New York landlords at the expense of and to the detriment of those of us who live here. Please do not approve this annexation and rezoning. Thank you.
Doug Jones.
Good evening, Mayor, Peck, and councilors. My name is Doug Jones, and I have lived at 243 Sherman Street for the last 22 years. I'm asking you to vote no on the annexation of 150 Francis Street and the Francis Street itself south of Spruce Avenue. As a neighbor, I deeply care about what gets built in my neighborhood and what it's going to look like in 50 years. To better understand the process, I've learned about the annexation process, the zoning ordinance, planning concepts, Rogers rules, attainable versus affordable, the list goes on. And in order to visualize, I do this in order to visualize the potential for what your decisions tonight can bring to bear on my neighborhood. It's a lot to take into consideration. Originally, I thought that by annexing 150 Francis, it would pave the way to a much needed path to connect the Bond Farm with the Creek Path system. What I did not realize at the time is that it would match the RMN zoning in that area. There's another project underway adjacent to this one, which has created much concern. It's become a crisis that the developer, neighbors, and city are trying to work out. As you've heard, folks living on this section of Francis Street were shocked to hear that because of the zoning change to RMN, this annexation can bring up to 18 units on just this one property on their quiet street. And it's a shock to anyone to hear because the current zoning is wholly out of sync with the rest of the neighborhood. Envision Longmont describes the part of this neighborhood south of Spruce as a stable area of change in an RMN zone that should serve as a transition, this is in quotes, a transition between single-family neighborhoods, higher density corridors, centers, and employment areas. That does not describe this area whatsoever. This is not a transition area to dense employment. In reality, this section of the Bond Farm neighborhood is an edge to open space, parks, and no businesses. The point is we don't get all the information we need to make the best decisions. To get that information, you need not only listen to all the evidence, but hear what the community is saying and weigh it against what Envision Longmont says about it all. And the community is saying, tap the brakes on infill development. I walked by 150 Francis this morning and noted again the overgrown, noxious weeds, the debris piles, and it is in stark contrast to the well-kept, owner-occupied properties to the north and west on the same street. In fact, you have an out-of-state landlord hiring a team of design professionals to bring a small acreage into Longmont saying he needs some sewer services. Fine, give him the sewer services, but don't open up the floodgates to more incompatible development and vote no on 150 Francis Street. Thank you.
John Lofgren.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. Thank you for the opportunity for us to come and present to you, and also for your listening and considering all these disparate points of views and problems that are, often in contrast and all over the map. But I had some prepared remarks, but I'm going to go off script with that. And the interesting thing about living in Bond Farm is we have a sort of a long memory, the historic Bond Farm neighborhood. We have a little bit of a memory in the community. Now, I just heard the representative for Mr. Wagner saying that all the non-conforming buildings were going to be removed. So not when I first moved to Longmont, but before I bought my home on Sherman, I had a little bit of negotiation with Mr. Wagner about purchasing that property. And at that time, I talked both to the people in the city and to the people in the county. And I was told that the building to the west, no, the building to the east, there's 2 units back to back. The one closest to the Bond Farm is non-conforming. It was never issued a permit. It's encroaching upon the right-of-way. And if you looked at the map that she had shared to you, you could see that thing is right on the line. And the reason why Mr. Wagner did not want to give the path right away before, because if 4 of the council people were going to walk down the path, proposed path, they would be scraping against the corner of the red building, which is there, the rental building. So in order for me to rehabilitate the older original property, I was told by the county and by the city that that building would have to be removed. And I haven't heard any mention of that today. So not only was Mr. Van Wagner not very forthcoming at that time, but I think that we haven't heard all that information here today. Secondly, at that time, when I considered the options, whether to bring it through the county or to bring it in through the city, I was told by the county it couldn't happen because of the non-conforming building. That building was built in 1971 illegally without a permit. Okay, Mr. Wagner's owned that place for 30 years. Not only has he not cleaned up the buildings, he's not done anything to bring the building into conformity with the existing rules. So I would ask you, are you going to give a septic to a non-conforming property? So, we've had a similar instance with the bar up the street. I don't want to go there with that, but they just got a permit for a roof for a addition that never had a permit. So it seems like you need to rope it in a little bit. But finally, so the other thing is that when I was in negotiations, I was told from the city that I would have to pave that road at my expense and provide a turnaround at the bottom for a fire truck, or I would have to request an easement from the neighbor to the south. I don't hear that mentioned today. So I would ask you to bring the applicant up to speed, and I would also ask that, being that we do not know at this point what the impact of the Bond Farm development will be, whether it's going to be 60 or 75 units, and we have the narrow 28-foot wide streets, we don't know what that impact's going to be. So I would ask that you not approve the annexation, which could perhaps allow more impact on the neighbors, and wait until the Bond Farm thing is settled, and then perhaps that could be reconsidered at that time. So again, you don't have to bring it into annexation at this point, but once things settle, that might be a time in which to consider it. And that would give Mr. Wagner time to bring his area into code, right, which he has not done. And the other thing is the neighbor up the street, he's the one who cut the weeds down there the other day. So much for he should get a citation instead of accommodation for his concern for the ecology. Thank you.
Thank you, John. Is there anyone else in the public that would like to have a voice on this ordinance? Please come down. Go ahead.
Hello, my name is Dan Woods. I live in the neighborhood. I live on Green Place. And, in terms of annexation, I think it's a real big mistake to move ahead with that. I live in the neighborhood, and Spruce cannot handle more traffic. You go down Spruce, and you have to always let a car go by, because if there's a car parked on the road, there's not enough room for 2 people to go by. And if we get annexation, which is a prelude to more development, which is higher density, I think we're going to have even more of a problem. I don't see this as a feasible thing, so I'd vote, I encourage you to vote against the annexation.
Thank you. So seeing no one else, I will close the public hearing on this item. Can I have a motion on the 2023-29 ordinance? Councilor Martin.
I move in favor of annexation And if there's a second, then I have some questions brought, that I still need clarification on. So I'm going to retain the floor.
Okay, it's been moved by Councilor Martin, seconded by Councilor Waters. Open it up for discussion.
I still have the
I know.
floor. Okay. So my first question is just to clarify. I think some of the things that have been, some of the statements that have been made by speakers have contradicted the statements made by the staff. So first of all, unless those septic systems fail or those homes are vacated and there is a development plan instead, those residents cannot get new sewer connections, even if there was a line right up that easement. Is that correct?
Councilmember Martin, could you say that one more time? You
Okay.
lost me there in the middle.
Sorry. A
It's
number of people have said that we could just give them a sewer connection, but I thought I understood the city manager to say that we cannot unless the systems are failing, which is true.
So, Councilmember Martin, there's two scenarios that are possible. The first scenario is that you don't annex them.
That's the scenario I'm talking about, if we don't annex them.
Then the way they get an outside sewer tap would be if their system fails and it's approved by the city council, then they would be allowed to have an outside sewer tap. The requirement of whether or not they would have to ask for that is based on the distance they are from existing sanitary sewer that could serve them.
Mm-hmm.
If they are outside of the distance, let's say, and I can't remember the number, but if the state statute says 500 feet and they're 600 feet, then they do not have to tie in because they're outside of that distance away from the sewer.
But we already know that they want to tie in.
They want to tie in, yes.
Yes. Okay. The next question that I have is, do we get to presume that, I'm sorry, there's so many questions, I'm having trouble stretching them out. We don't have any ability to cause the outbuildings that are non-compliant to be removed while this is in Boulder County. So we've got a bunch of, as somebody mentioned, a bunch of messy buildings that we have no authority over, that are messy, and they're going to stay messy unless this annexation happens, and then we will be able to get them removed.
Mayor Peck, Councilmember Martin, so there's two areas of nonconformity. One is in the Francis Street right-of-way area, so that is on the west side of the property. The alley area that is on the east side of the property is already in the city limits. So that right-of-way is technically the city of Longmont's right-of-way. The question then becomes whether or not we would want to go through and enforce or require people to remove improvements out of that.
So some of the messiness, we do have the ability to enforce removal already, and some we don't. I just need simpler answers.
So I don't think I'm the person to tell you whether or not we're going to tell someone to go out there and tear down a...
Oh, I didn't say whether we are or not. I said we would have the ability. Some of them that are already in a city right-of-way, we could do something about now. But others that are on the private property, we don't have any ability to do something unless they're in the city of Longmont. Is that yes?
So I think that's a legal question beyond something that I should answer for you. From the standpoint of whether or not the city is going to make somebody go out there and tear down a building in our right-of-way.
Don, I didn't ask that. I did not ask that.
Okay, so if you're, the second part, as I understood your question, then if it's was, can we make somebody who's in the county tear down a building that is non-conforming?
I didn't ask that either.
Then I'm not understanding your questions.
Okay. While the non-conforming buildings are on county land, is it true that the city does not have any ability to do any code enforcement on that?
That is true. That's not in
Okay.
the municipality.
And the non-conforming structures that are in an easement, if the city chose to do code enforcement there, we could do it now. Yes or no?
So you stated easement,
Well,
not
isn't-
right-of-way.
Right of way, excuse me.
Okay.
I have to admit that the distinction is elusive to me. But right of way, the city of Longmont could, if it chose, improve those buildings or require that they be removed as it stands.
I want to say yes, but what I would tell you is that going in that direction of requiring somebody or taking down someone's building in our right-of-way has challenges, let's put it that way, that I would want to depend on the person to my right, both of those people, before we would move forward with taking down a building.
Right, but that's not where I'm going. I want this annexation. I'm just trying to draw the distinction because a number of speakers have made false statements, such as the city could just give them sewer connections anytime it wanted to, and it can't. And so I want to make sure that I understand the whole situation because a number of people have cited these non-conforming buildings. And I want to understand the whole picture about the non-conforming buildings.
I do want to say that they didn't say we could give them sewer connections. What I heard was that permits. Permits for sewer connections, which they would have to pay for. If
I beg
understand
your
it.
pardon. I didn't mean give them for free. But nevertheless, the city manager stated that the city is not permitted to allow sewer connections to the city sewer system unless they are annexed or their systems are failing.
If I can jump in, within that code, there's two different issues. And I think what we see in other areas of the community in terms of services we're providing outside are also regulated by a different section of the same code. So the code very clearly states that an area outside of the city, unless the they can't connect unless the septic system is failing.
Mm-hmm.
Very clear on that. If it's not failing, then the code says we will reject those applications.
Mm-hmm.
Some of the other areas that, and I was made aware of an email of the request, what do we have outside of the city? And there are areas, but there are actually exceptions within that same code that allows other areas to connect to sewer, and I'll read those for council right now. It says the following shall not be subject to the provisions of this chapter. Sewer service outside city limits if required by the IGA, intergovernmental agreement between the city and Boulder County, concerning transfer development rights included in the appendix of this code as it may be amended or extended. So where you have transfer development rights, I think a couple of examples of where we did extend sewer related to that is actually the Portico development on the west side of town, and then I believe the development on the northwest corner of Hover and 66. But there was an exclusion in the chapter of the code based on the IGA with the city.
The IGA, what's called the super IGA that's being renegotiated now, is that correct?
It's the TDR, it's the one related to TDRs. But it's an IGA.
I don't know what a TDR is.
Transfer development rights.
Okay.
Point 2, water service pursuant to a tap trade agreement between the city and a water district. And so we have brought tap trades before where left-hand water in the city, we're trading taps. Point 3, water or sewer service to city facilities, as we find that it benefits the inhabitants of the city. Water or sewer service outside of the city limits as required as a result of a city construction project. So when we see that we connect outside of our jurisdiction in other areas where there's not a failing septic tank, it is under Section D and the provisions that allow us to do that. And I think that's where some of the confusion's coming in as to where we do connect outside of the system.
So, what I just want to get down to, not, I don't care whether somebody made an error or not. I don't care whether it was you or whether it was them. What I want to understand is would we grant a permission to give these people a sewer connection if they're not annexed and their septic tanks are not failing?
No.
Thank you.
Councilor Hidalgo Fehring.
Thank you, Mayor. I'm not in support of this, and as I said earlier, I'll be voting no. As I said earlier, typically I am in favor of annexations. There are opportunities with that. I think we need to tread carefully as we're looking at some of our older neighborhoods. I used to live on the corner of near Bowen and Spruce, and I remember in my little Ford Focus when I first moved in the area, taking a wrong turn in the snow in that street. I couldn't get out, just sliding down, and my husband had to come and rescue me. So I understand just from my own personal experience, as well as we're voted to represent our community. And I know that there have been several things that have come to our table that received immense opposition, but additionally, I've also received comments of support. So, it's trying to balance that and look at the greater good. I have yet to hear anyone who lives and breathes and, that whole, living in that area, coming up and saying, this is a good idea. I feel like we need to take a step back. And it does seem like the annexation is premature, considering they're wanting to tap into a development that's been put on hold. So, and I'm not necessarily talking to you, I'm talking to everybody, I just happen to be looking at you. So, and there are some concerns that brought up, the RMN zoning. I'd like to have an opportunity to chat with staff personally and just kind of weigh that out as well. So I feel like I'm not ready to move forward on this.
Councilor Waters.
Thanks, Mayor Peck. Don, if we were to table or pass on this tonight, what are the options for the applicants? How long would they wait before they could resubmit an application?
Mayor Peck, Councilmember Waters, the Land Development Code states that if a project is denied, a similar application cannot be submitted for a year. So it ultimately would come down to whether or not the proposal was similar. And so if they came back in with the exact same request, they would have to wait for 1 year.
So, and just to confirm or remind me, there is no proposed infill development here. Is that?
That's correct.
A council would have to approve. Would that go through P&Z as well?
Yes, sir.
So
they
go
would
through
make the
P&Z before it
recommendation.
got here.
Yes, sir.
And if I'm not mistaken, all of our P&Z members are members of the community.
Yes, sir.
Right. So we represent a lot of folks, including folks who we asked to serve in the interest of the city and residents here and in other places. Just to clarify again, Harold, I understand the questions that Councilmember Martin was asking in your answers. If this is denied or it's tabled, it remains in the county and the conditions under which an application would be approved, right? Only if it's failing.
Correct.
Yeah. If it's annexed, then what are the conditions?
Don, you're going to have to help me on this one. But if it's annexed and they chose to connect to the sewer system, they could connect, but they would have to pay for all of the cost.
So they can make application, they would cover the costs of that connection. So it doesn't require a failed septic system to be connected to the sewer if it's in the city.
Correct.
My last question, I want to clarify one more time. I heard a speaker make the comment that it's up to the county to respond to emergency on that stretch of Francis, if there is one. I think I heard Assistant Chief Goldman say that's not the case, that it's our firefighters or public safety, fire or police, who are going to be on that street responding if there's a call. So the risk isn't to Mountain View, it's not to somebody else in the county, it's the people who work for us.
Correct, and I want to give some context to this. If there's an emergency, and if there's a fire, if there's a health emergency, based on our interoperability agreements, it's closest service, and so that's pretty clear on fire.
I got it. I'm just saying there was a statement made that's not an accurate statement. Correct?
In an emergency situation, and so I wanted to go to police. If there were an active police issue that was an emergency, again, the IGA comes into play. But if, let's say, there was a burglary that's not an immediate emergent situation, then Boulder County would respond to that.
Sure, I get that.
And then even in the emergency situations, we will transfer it over to Boulder County or Mountain View, right? Once we're able to do that.
But the initial responders, first responders, are people who work for the city of Longmont, who we also represent. Right. I think that's all my questions. Thanks.
Mayor Pro Tem Rodriguez.
Thank you, Mayor Peck. First of all, a question. Don might be able to help, but I'm pretty confident that Assistant City Manager Marsh will really know. When was it that we talked about enclaves and the possibility of force annexing?
Don and I collectively will use our minds, but we think 2017 maybe, where we went and looked at, brought forth, all the places that were enclaves,
Right, and that was pretty early in my first term. So to say that we haven't been considering these kinds of annexations until just now, and to say that it's premature, I think is incorrect. We were looking at this, many different parts of the city, but also we decided that we weren't going to force annex. We were going to allow people to petition to annex. And this is an example of somebody in an enclave petitioning to annex, which at the time I felt that council was amenable to. I would like to second the statement that Councilmember Waters made. Sorry, I lost my train of thought on that one. It was the first point he made when we were talking about. No, never mind. I'll just move on. So the other thing that is of utmost importance is the housing crisis facing the city. Oh, now I remember what it was. It was Councilmember Waters talking about the procedure of having to change the concept plan. So I wanted to bring that up again. A city council will have to address that should they actually decide to bring forward some sort of development to that property. That's another quote unquote bite at the apple that we possibly wouldn't have if we didn't annex, because I've always stated that I believe in annexation for the concept of jurisdiction. Jurisdictional purpose, allowing us to have power for code enforcement for things like, for instance, what's in my opinion hyperbole about the steep grade of that area. I've been down there, and there's multiple streets in Longmont that I feel have a more steep grade that can be accommodated. So again, we only have jurisdiction over these things, and I am not of the opinion that the city and the county works together in any sort of efficient manner. That's just my opinion. So I wouldn't necessarily want to try to go into some laborious process of negotiating with the county to talk about widening a dirt road rather than just annexing it and having that part of our jurisdiction to create a more safe environment for emergency services or waste services, or even just the folks getting in and out of the neighborhood. To me, it would be much more safe if it was widened and paved, which would again be under our jurisdiction if we annex. And so for these reasons enumerated, I will be in support of the annexation.
Councilor McCoy.
Thank you, Mayor Peck. I will be voting against this. I hear all those other issues that have been brought up about safety and cleaning up the property and other things like that. But this property has been there for literally decades in use as is, and though we may have to defend a fire in some off chance there, I think the real issue here is that we could have, if the sewer fails, we can deal with it at that time. Otherwise, I think it's best to just not support this today and listen to the community members. I grew up in that neighborhood, and I rode around Bond Farm as a young person, and I can tell you that Spencer Street cannot take the capacity of traffic and the whole problem with that whole area there is that this is a slippery slope that is going to open up other opportunities, and I think it's something we should avoid.
Thank you. One last comment. I know that Mayor Pro Tem Rodriguez doesn't think that working with the county in any capacity is a good thing at times. But if we are concerned about that road, from my perspective, annexing one property is not going to take care of that entire road. It's still a county road. So an IGA possibly with the county to fix the road if there is true safety issues there. We could look at that. That's because all of the people living on that road, it's not just this one property. So also the property, Bond Farm property is not going to be developed within this year. It just isn't going to be. What the presenter said was that they gave some of that easement for the sewer connection when Bond Farm is developed. So that is the connection that they want for their sewer system. So I don't see any problem waiting to see what happens with the Bond Farm development and just putting off the annexation to see what the whole area is going to do. And I do think if it's a safety issue, we need to talk to our fire department, to the county, and figure out what we can do with that road, regardless of whether it's annexed or not. If that is truly a fire department issue with fire trucks and emergency vehicles, it's been that way forever, so we do need to address that. It's been brought up, so now I think we need to address it. Councilor Yarbrough.
Thank you, Mayor Peck. Really good conversation. I would like to say thank you to all the residents in that area for coming in and speaking up for your area, and you know what you have to deal with every day, so I appreciate that. There are a lot of safety issues. That's what it sounds like to me. There are a lot of safety issues that need to be addressed either way. However, I do believe in us having jurisdiction over that area as well. So I'm the way I feel is, and also I really don't care for, listening to the speakers, how do we address the owner of that property? Because they need to be held accountable for some of those safety issues and how that property looks. And so can we make sure that they do their part as the owner of their property? And I understand that they will pay for the sewer system. I guess for me, what I want to know, I know I'm kind of just talking all over the place. I do want us to have jurisdiction, but at the same time, I also want to make sure that the residents are, that area is safe for them. So I know you're looking at me like, Shakita, what do you want? That's a good question. So what can we do to make sure that the owner of that property is in compliant first before we decide to annex that property? I don't know who am I talking to. Is that Joni or Don? You didn't hear the question, did you?
I'm sorry, I was talking with Harold. I apologize.
Harold, what do we need to do to make sure that that property is in compliance first from the owner before we annex it? Or can we do that?
That's a great question, Councilor Yarborough. And what you could do is that could be a condition before we could record the annexation, was that any of the problems that are on that property that are identified be cleaned up before we would record the annexation. It could be a condition. So that is one thing the council could do. The way the annexation agreement is right now is that once you are in, we could force compliance on the buildings and the structures that are non-conforming, but it doesn't really speak to any of the other items right now that, may be of concern to some of the neighbors, like some of the state of the property. Let's leave it at that. But that's how you could address that.
Okay. And we know there's not a proposal for development at this time, right?
That is what we have been told through this entire process, so that is the only information I have.
Okay. Harold, you got something to say?
I was talking to him about the answer to your question.
Okay. Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Seeing no other comments, let's vote. Councilor McCoy, were you able to vote?
Yes, I was.
Okay. So that fails with Councilor Martin, Councilor Mayor Pro Tem Rodriguez, and Councilor Waters in favor, and myself, Councilor Yarbrough, Councilor Hidalgo-Ferring, and Councilor McCoy again opposed. Thank you. Thank everybody who came to testify. I'm sure this will come back to us next year. It's too late. All right. So the next thing on our agenda is 10C, a bill for an ordinance authorizing the city of Longmont to lease the real property known as Vance Brand Municipal Airport Hangar Parcels SH1T, SH2T, SH3T, SH4T, and SH5T, the premises, to V2 Condo Association Incorporated tenant. Are there any questions from council on this ordinance? Seeing none, I'd like to open up the public hearing on ordinance 2023-30. Is there anybody in the auditorium that would like to comment on this? Seeing none, I will close the public comment and ask for a motion on 2023-30.
I move 2023-30.
It's been moved by Mayor Pro Tem Rodriguez, seconded by Councilor Martin. Let's vote. you want to give a voice vote, Counselor? Oh, it went. Okay, great, thanks. So that passes unanimously. Thank you. We are now at the general business portion of our agenda.
We're on item, yeah, thank you.
Oh, we did have one. I'm sorry, Counselor Waters. The items removed from the consent agenda was 9F. Counselor Waters removed that? Or pulled it?
Thanks, Mayor Peck. Yeah, I have just some questions that I need to have answered. I think others do as well. But Mayor Peck, you weren't here this evening during public invited to be heard, but the rest of us were. And given my understanding of what is proposed now as the rule, I guess maybe I'll ask the Mayor Pro Tem, how many of the people who spoke tonight would have been eligible to speak with the rules as they've been proposed, the rule change as it's been proposed?
Half. About half.
Well, none of them spoke to an item on the agenda.
Right, well, as far as the residency requirement.
So just so I'm, maybe I'm not understanding, residents who want to speak on things that are not on the agenda can do that. They don't have to be speaking to something on the agenda.
Correct. We have not made that stipulation.
All right, so they can speak to any topic on the agenda or not if they're a resident.
Correct.
Now, what the wording in the change in ordinance, the word is not resident, it's citizen.
And I thought, do we have a consensus on that word citizen?
Just.
Okay, go ahead.
So anybody who would want to speak to the council and is not a citizen of the United States.
No.
Then what's the definition of citizen?
It is, we were told that, and it is a municipality, a city, the state. In this sense, it is of the municipality.
Do you suppose every mayor is going to interpret that the same way?
I have no idea.
Yeah. I'm going to vote no on just on that basis as we get into this because that is pretty simple, this change, and then I'd be resident.
Do you want to amend it?
Well, I have a few more questions.
Okay.
The changes, there are 3 changes that we're considering tonight. The third of the 3 changes is about public invited to be heard. The first 2 changes, at least one of the first 2 changes, in terms of how we appoint board and commission members, came up, we did a first reading a year or so, more than a year ago. It came back to us as a reminder that we had not finished the work on that. There was a second reading.
Correct.
And I was personally anxious for us to get that done before we went through this last round of board and commission appointments. Now, we went ahead and used that procedure, but the response was we wanted to wait. The mayor, you wanted to wait to deal with changes in rules and procedures until we could deal with all of the rules and procedures at one time. So we wouldn't be doing it piecemeal or one-off. And the strongest argument at the time was about ethics. Came up during a council meeting. We spent 2 pre-sessions. I've got some of the materials you shared with us in front of me. We spent 2 pre-sessions talking about ethics, ethics committees, ethics standards, ethics definitions. That conversation just went away. So we delayed changes in rules and procedures because we wanted to address that issue in the context of rules and procedures. That's no longer a concern?
That it is a concern, and the ethics did not go away. It was in.
We haven't discussed it in months.
Well, I know. I had said at the last meeting that pre-session that we had that the city attorney and myself and the city attorney of Fort Collins discussed the rules of procedure and the legality of adopting phrases or portions of another one. The reason that we didn't get into that, even though it was on the agenda, was because we got into a larger discussion. What was that discussion about? I can't remember, but it went too long. And social media. It was about social media. It went over. And then I canceled this last one because we had too much on the agenda. And that it has not been dropped. It's going to be picked up again at our next pre-session.
So
and for me, I'm sorry if I did not interpret or say that correctly. These are not all in one thing. These are three different things.
But they're all part of council rules and procedures.
No, the ethics is not necessarily council
Well,
rules
that was the
and
reason
procedure.
it was delayed. When I brought
confused.
when the question came up
Right.
about finishing the job that we had started on how we appoint board and commission members, the reason for not doing it then was the issue or the topic of ethics and what to do with it. And I've been wondering since, is that going to come back? How is it going to come back? Obviously, it's not going to come back in the context of rules and procedures. Now, I think the response to my other question would be, yes, we're going to deal with these on a kind of a piecemeal basis, on maybe not one-off, but we're going to go ahead, based on what's on tonight's agenda, we're going to go ahead with changing rules and procedures, knowing that there's more work to do.
Mm-hmm.
Oh.
And the other thing, from my perspective in the pre-sessions, and this is for me, it is a learning process because we've never done the pre-sessions before. But when I did ask for input on the rules of procedures or on the ethics, I didn't get much feedback at all. So that was one reason that the city attorney of Fort Collins, I reached out to her, and then Eugene, I said, let's go talk to them. And because that was the one that resonated with a lot of the things that we were talking about. But I didn't get any feedback on who wanted to work on that
So if there are other changes that, since we haven't had a question as a council or a conversation as a council about, so are there other changes in rules and procedures that we would like to see?
Sure, if you see any in there, please speak up.
I will.
That's what I'm trying to get counselors to do.
Well, I just thought we might have had a conversation before we saw something on the agenda about, is there anything else we'd want to be addressing? So the only other related question for me is, the topic or the question of, are people required during public invited to be heard to give their address of residence? Based on what we heard tonight, I think the answer is no.
Which part?
The residents will not be required to state their address of residence in order to speak during public invited to be heard.
I wasn't here during the first. Did they state it? I don't know.
Some did, some didn't.
Not direct street numbers, but there's
Streets?
And it's written down. For the record, it's all written down. But yes, they do have to do that. Now,
They have to do what?
state their name and address.
As if they're going to speak to us.
Yes.
So then somebody's going to have to enforce that. Because it wasn't enforced tonight. It hasn't been enforced in other meetings.
You know, Councilor Waters, part of that's true and part of it is not true. There are meetings, and I'm sure other people would do, when I see a name on here and I know that person and their address is on here, I will ask them, but if I forget, anyone else can say, we need their address. It isn't, anybody can jump in here and ask.
That's not our protocol. I mean, you're running that part of the meeting.
So are you, let's get back to this ordinance. Are you going to?
Well, it's part of council rules and procedures. It either is or isn't part of council rules and procedures. And it hasn't been, and it isn't with the proposed, but there was a statement made some weeks ago when we were in this conversation earlier, when we were talking about a related issue, that people were going to be required to state their address of residence. But we've been pretty inconsistent with whether or not that's a real expectation.
It is a real expectation.
Then it ought to be written into council rules and procedures, it seems to me. Because that's where we stipulate, right, what the procedure is. My last question is this. During public hearings, and I'd have to go back and look at it's both in the charter, and we have language in the council rules and procedures. Are people time limited when they're addressing council during a second reading in a public hearing?
Mayor and council members, I believe they are limited to 3 minutes under Rule 5.
Now, I don't know how many people went over 3 minutes tonight. Maybe nobody did, but we weren't timing them.
We weren't timing them,
So
no.
it just seems to me if we're gonna, if that's stipulated, like,
It was a mistake. It was a mistake tonight. And I totally apologize to anybody that this has annoyed. Mayor Pro Tem usually does this. He left it over here. Because I wasn't here, it got a little confused.
okay.
So I think we're okay. I mean, it's not, you also have gone over 3 minutes or 5 minutes.
Yeah, well, I'm not a
and
member of the public standing out there. I'm on this side of the dais.
I know,
I
but
was
you
elected
still
to do this,
But you still have a time limit. And my point is.
which is pretty random. Sometimes we have it,
That's
sometimes
the
we don't.
point. That is the point. So, I don't think this is an issue. And does anyone else think this is an issue?
It really doesn't matter to me who else thinks it's an issue. If I think it's an issue for me.
Okay, I get that. What do you want to do about it?
I would like us to be consistent.
Thank you. We'll do that. Do you want to amend any of these rules of procedure?
I didn't propose them. I'll leave that to you.
So I do have a question though, before we move on. Does anyone else on this council have a problem with the word citizen being part of, okay, Councilor Hidalgo Ferring.
Okay, so it is the Oxford Dictionary, the second definition of, so it is a definition of citizen is the inhabitant of a particular town or city, for example, the citizens of Los Angeles. If you go down to, and then so I looked up at law definition, and that one gets into more, a citizen is a person who by place of birth, nationality of one or both parents, or naturalization is granted full rights and responsibilities as a member of a nation or political community. So in looking at what law term, as well as the conflict of how citizen could be open to interpretation. There are a couple of areas on Rule 5, including the title of citizen participation, because the title in and of itself, and if we take the first definition, are only people who are naturalized citizens, people who are born in the United States. So that can be problematic. I don't even think resident participation is just public participation. I would propose changing the title to public participation. Instead of citizens within Section A and C, where we amended the word, I would move to have that word stricken and put residents or residents of, Longmont, only Longmont residents or residents of Longmont.
Do you want to make that an amendment?
Yes, I'd propose to amend the word citizens for the title, to move it to public participation, and then for the two references to Longmont citizens in Section A and in Section B, to change that to residents.
Second.
Second it. So we didn't have a motion yet to move these. So we have a motion to amend it. Do you want to make a motion to move it as amended? The amendment Rule 5. Okay, then, okay, so I move Rule 3, amend Rule 5. And then so it's a second amendment we're doing on this. We're amending it to begin with, and now we're going to amend the wording on it.
I think, Mayor, we have a motion on the floor to make that wording change. We would vote on the wording change, and then you can vote to approve as amended. Am I
Okay.
correct on that, Eugene?
Okay,
Nodding.
great.
Yay.
So we have a vote from, a motion from Counselor Hidalgo Faring to amend the wording in Rule 5. And did you second it? Counselor McCoy seconded that. So let's vote.
And if I can just make sure, Mayor, that I've captured that, to change the title to public participation,
Yes.
and then in paragraphs A and C to switch that out to say Longmont residents instead of the word citizen.
Correct.
Okay.
All right, we'll have a discussion on it. Counselor Martin.
I have two questions. The first one is, we have to vote on these as a group, correct, as they're presented? So we either pass all of them or fail all of them?
I don't think so. These are just 3 amendments. They're not, I don't think it's a slate.
Yeah, I believe you could, Mayor and Council, I believe you could split them apart if you liked.
Okay. Then I will have a motion after we vote on the current amendment. And that's all for now.
Counselor Hidalgo Faring. No, I don't, I'm sorry. Okay. So let's vote on this amendment, Rule 5. It doesn't work tonight. Do you want to give a voice vote, Counselor? So that carries 6-1 with Counselor Martin in opposition. Let me move this. Make it back up here. So the second one, let's go back up to the first one, to remove reference to Friday work sessions from Rule 25 meetings and replace it with monthly pre-sessions from 6 to 7. I know you have your light on, Counselor Martin. Let's go back then to your amendment for number 3, what you wanted to speak on.
No, that's actually not what I want to speak on. I think since this was presented as a single letter, but the city clerk said that we could vote on them individually, that the first thing we would do is to have we would need to have a motion to vote on them individually rather than as a single item. Am I correct in that? Or can the mayor just decide to vote on them individually?
Mayor Peck and Councilmember Martin, there were 3 amendments proposed. I think you could consider each of the amendments individually. So we considered an amendment to the Rule 5, which was the 3rd item. So we could consider that amendment, finalize that one, and then move on to the other 2.
Right.
Would make some sense to me.
Okay, then I do want to speak about the amendment to about Amendment 5, which is, didn't we discuss at the last time we took these issues up that if we didn't leave the word citizen there, then we would require a charter amendment because the charter uses the word citizen?
Mayor and Council, Eugene May, City Attorney, you mentioned the word charter, I turn on my light. So,
Thank you.
Yes, the charter uses the term citizen and employee shall have a reasonable opportunity to be heard. The rules mirror the charter language. I think the term citizen, as Councilmember Hidalgo Faring pointed out, is open to interpretation. I will note in qualifications of council members, Charter Section 3.2 one of the qualifications is a citizen of the United States of America. Under rules of statutory construction, the drafters of the charter are imputed to know how to say citizen of the United States if they wanted to. Therefore, citizen would be a different term. I think resident of Longmont is a reasonable interpretation of that term citizen. And so if council wants to put resident in there, I think that's a reasonable interpretation.
So Eugene, are you saying that we do or do not have to change the charter to match rules of procedure? That wording, do they have to match?
The wording does not have to match.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I am still going to vote no because I love democracy so much. And even though some people that I vehemently disagree with have been weaponizing public invited to be heard recently, I will fight to the death for their right to do that. And so I think we should leave this alone, and I'm going to vote no.
Okay.
And I also find that when Madam Mayor has very strong feelings about something, she tends to interrupt the speaker who has the floor. So I just like to say that I wish she wouldn't.
Thank you. So we need a motion to pass Rule 5, citizen participation as amended.
Rule 5 as amended.
I'll second that. Any discussion? Seeing none, let's vote.
Let me just correct this wording. I just want to be clear.
We are kind of all over the board here. I apologize. So we're waiting on 2 people? So that passes unanimous. No, I'm sorry, it passes 6-1 with Mayor Pro Tem Rodriguez in opposition. You voted yes. So thank you. Let's go back to the other 2 amendments. Number 1, remove reference to Friday work sessions from Rule 25 meetings and replace it with monthly pre-sessions. Okay, prior to the LH Board of Commissioner meetings. I will move to accept the amendment for Rule 25. Second. Any discussion on Rule 25? Seeing none, let's vote. That carries unanimously. So the last one that we need to do is number 2, reintroduction and passage of board pre-interview changes in Rule 27. Boards that were introduced in March 2022 but not brought back for second reading and thus not officially adopted. And it was both city attorney and city clerk that brought this to my attention, that we had not. So, Counselor Waters.
Just clarification. When we saw this the first time, it was a first reading?
Yes.
That would suggest, was it an ordinance in that
Must
case?
have been.
So,
If I might, Eugene may have slicker wording for this, but council rules of procedure, we do on two readings, so the public has a fair chance to weigh in on any
so
changes.
it's two readings, not an
It's
ordinance, but it's
like
two
an
readings.
ordinance,
All right.
correct.
So this would be the first of two readings. We would see this.
Correct.
Both of these. All right, thanks.
So let me just make it clear, this is the second reading of something we've already. Okay. Oh, you were doing it over. Okay, all right. Sounds good. All right, Counselor Hidalgo Ferry.
Okay, thank you, Mayor. So I do have, so this would come back to us with an opportunity for public comment, correct? Okay, so, yeah, so, you know, I still have, I have some concerns about how this has been working, so I would really love to hear from board and commission, people who are on these boards and commissions, to have them weigh in before I proceed. So, yeah, I'll support this moving forward, but I really, just to obtain public comment on this issue.
So do you want to move it?
So I will move this change.
Rule 27.
Rule 27, thank you.
Okay, so it's been moved by Counselor Hidalgo Ferry, seconded by Counselor Shakita Yarbrough, that we bring back Rule 27 for a first reading and officially adopted. Got it. Because it's not on the consent agenda. Okay. Counselor Martin.
So that's true of all three of these, correct? Thank you.
Seeing no other comments, let's vote. So you'll have a chance to address that other one, Counselor Martin, on second reading. And that carries unanimously. Here we are. So, yep, under general business, can I have a motion to recess?
I move we recess as the Longmont City Council and reconvene as General Improvement District Number 1.
Second. So that's been moved by Mayor Pro Tem Rodriguez, seconded by Counselor Martin. Let's vote. That carries unanimously. So under the, General Improvement District Number 1, we have a resolution RLGID-2023-02, a resolution of the Board of Directors of the Longmont General Improvement District Number 1, enacting a supplemental budget and making an additional appropriation for the expenses and liabilities of the district for the fiscal year beginning January 1st, 2023. Can I have a motion to move this? Thank you. So this has been moved. Our LGID 2023-02 was moved by Counselor Martin, seconded by Counselor Waters. Let's vote. That passes unanimously. Can I have a motion to adjourn? been moved by Counselor Waters, seconded by Counselor Hidalgo, referring to adjourn as the Board of Directors. All those, let's vote, please. That carries unanimously. We have under general business, B, R 2023-60, a resolution of the Longmont City Council supporting a grant application to the Colorado Department of Local Affairs for air quality analysis and climate resilience planning. And I see Jane Turner.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. You'll be pleased to learn that I do not have a presentation about this grant application. I just wanted to take a quick moment to highlight for all of you that staff are actively seeking funding opportunities to be able to do more research on all this great air quality data that we've been gathering, and also that we're working really closely with other communities along the Front Range that are also doing their own local government air quality monitoring. So fingers crossed for this if you approve it, and I'm happy to answer any questions if you have them.
Great. Councilor Martin.
Thank you, Mayor Peck. I vote passage of R 2023-60.
Thank you. That's been moved by Counselor Martin, seconded by Counselor Hidalgo Faring. Let's vote. Thank you. That carries unanimously. Jane, thank you for all the work you're doing. I hope we get this grant. Be great. We're now at final call, public invited to be heard. Is there anybody from the public still here that would like to address council? Seeing none, I will close final call, public invited to be heard. We have mayor and council comments. Counselor Hidalgo Faring.
So I have a couple of announcements. One is on the Sunday, the July 31st, is the Nepali Jatra event at the museum. You can look up information on the website. As you know, you can get your tickets. Come. I attended last year for a brief period of time, and it was a wonderful event, and I learned a lot. And then the other thing, I had kind of worked with. What's that? The July 30, Sunday the 30th. Thank you. My calendar starts with the Monday. Yes. So, yeah, it throws me off because I look at and see it as Sunday. So, thank you for the correction. It is Sunday the 30th. The other, I had been in contact with some businesses in Ward 3, and things got delayed because of COVID, and just opportunity to kind of restart it up with a community conversations with folks in Ward 3. But again, it's open to anybody who wants to come. So I do have something scheduled. A business did volunteer to open their establishment on August 3rd from 5:30 to 7 to just come in and, for me, it's a listening tour. I kind of want to hear predominantly what residents in Ward 3, anyone's welcome, have some barbecue, and just let me know your concerns or just things that are pressing issues. So throwing that out there. It is at Dickey's Barbecue on North Main.
Ooh, they're good. Mm-hmm. Seeing no other counselors in the queue, city manager remarks. Harold?
I know you all are anxious in, and I forgot something in my first section on city manager comments. One of the things, we've been providing council with information regarding West Nile and the traps across the community. Public health is, this is probably the strongest worded recommendation we've had from them in terms of West Nile. The numbers that we're seeing in the traps are the highest that we've seen since we've been collecting the data. And so we are going to engage in more spraying activities. I'm actually using $40,000 for my contingency to cover that cost because it wasn't budgeted. Going back in history, I think in the first 6 months that I was actually here in Longmont, we had a lot of conversation about mosquito spraying. We eventually allowed for shutoffs and other components, but we set some criteria in terms of when we would do this. And as we learned from COVID, we do take our public health advice from Boulder County Public Health, and this is a significant issue, so we are increasing spraying, and we're continuing to work with them. I know we've sent this to you via email. I just wanted to say it in this session, so it's on record.
Thank you. City Attorney Eugene.
No comments, Mayor.
Thank you. Can I have a motion to adjourn? Thanks. That's been made by Councilor Martin, seconded by Councilor Waters. All those in favor? Thank you. Good evening. Good night.